one of God's choice servants. But no matter who you are, criticism is going to come. It is part and parcel of just leadership. Well, David is facing one of the hardest days of his life, but this time the criticism wasn't from outside, it was from inside. He's lost Israel. They don't respect him. Now his own men want to kill him. And it took David facing his darkest days to get him to look to Jesus. And I say that phrase loosely. At that point, it will be look to God. But he does. And I wrote this down. And we've got to acknowledge it because it's just true. Criticism is a part of life. Say, oh me, if you believe that. Criticism is a part of life. If you live, and especially if you lead, you're going to be criticized. Sometimes it's just. I still think to talk about somebody instead of talking to somebody, there's a big difference. But that's not my sermon this morning. He's criticized. It is a part of life. Leadership is lonely sometimes because of criticism. But some of God's best face criticism. I was just working on the sermon and several things came to mind. I remember just jotting down on a scratch sheet of paper. You know, Job. He had not done wrong. Matter of fact, the Bible calls him a righteous man. And yet when everything befalls Job, his friends come around him. Remember what they said? Job, you need to confess what's in your life right now. You need to get this out in the open. You need to, because God's judging you. And your unconfessed sin is why he's judging you. And can you imagine being Job? He's being criticized for a sin that he's not committed. I mean, he's like, I would confess if there was something to confess, but I don't know what I would confess. But he was criticized. I thought a little bit more, and you know, we could go Old Testament, we could go New, but my mind went to Moses, and my goodness, when you're talking about a man that led the whiners and complainers, it just doesn't get any deeper, doesn't get any harder than Moses. I mean, he gives them water out of a rock, they walk across on dry ground, he feeds them, the whole crowd. I mean, he's responsible for all these things, and no matter what they did, it would just be a matter of time before they found something else to criticize. And that was Moses' life. I thought about Paul every year at this time. It's just coincidental. I'm at this portion, but every year at this time, when I'm teaching Homiletics 1 at Southeastern, I'm teaching my Homiletics 1 class, I tell them that if you're going to be thin-skinned, you should not get in the pastorate. Because there's no place for a pastor. If you're thin-skinned, it's going to be difficult for you. And I said, and don't think that you're the exception to any rule because, and I always go to Thessalonians, where the Apostle Paul is writing to those at Thessalonica, and he's been accused of 3 things. They falsely accused him, and one of them is guile, that actually he preached with pride. It was just to be seen of men, you know, and he was accused of guile. He was accused of being really unbelievable. He was accused of being lazy. There's no way to sidestep what, and he responds. And I love what he says. He says, I was a co-laborer with you. I came alongside of you. He said, not only was I a co-laborer, I loved you like a mother nursing her baby. And I led you like a father with firmness with his children. That was his response. Well, why did he respond that way? Because they were criticizing him. And so I would simply say to you, criticism, no matter who you are, you can be one of God's choice servants. But no matter who you are, criticism is going to come. It is part and parcel of just leadership. Well, David is facing one of the hardest days of his life, but this time the criticism wasn't from outside, it was from inside. And boy, it hurt. It had brought him to himself. And we're going to see David respond with wisdom and with grace and with faith. And to be honest with you, he's going to challenge me a little bit because I need to have that same spirit. And I bet I'm not the only one in here that needs that spirit. Let's go back to the text. I want you to see 3 things. This is a very spiritual sermon. 3 points. Number 1, I want you to see the pressure that fuels criticism. The pressure that fuels criticism. I want you to go back 1 chapter because we're going to have to repaint this a little bit. Chapter 29, we're just going to read just portions of 1 through 5. Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And so the Philistines are all at Aphek, and all of God's people, the Israelites, are gathered around Jezreel area. They're on either sides ready for what Peterson calls this epic battle. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, and they're showing off. You can almost see the line of the warriors as they're walking by, showing off how powerful they are. And by the way, the Philistines are very impressive. It's what sent Saul to the occult to find out what he needs to do next. We'll come back to that. And at the end is David. And Achish is obviously walking with David. He's at the very end of it. Man, the commanders, they see David coming and marching with the Philistine army, and the commanders are like, no, he's not. But Achish is like, oh yeah, he's proven himself. Look how faithful he's been to us. We've watched, he's been among us. And he had been. For 1 year and 4 months, David had lived in Ziklag, and David had been with King Achish, and David had lived with the Philistines. And yes, all that is true. But if you go to verse 4, the commanders say, make this fellow return, that he may go again to this place which thou hast appointed him. Let him go back to Ziklag. Go back to that area you gave him. And let him not go down with us to battle. Why? The commanders, they were scared of David. They mistrusted David. So Israel can't trust him. He's willing to fight against him. Remember that. Now the Philistines can't trust him. They're thinking that we're going to go into battle facing Israel this way. And then all of a sudden, when the battle gets thick, right behind us is David and his men, which have already proven to be pretty strong in their own right. And we're going to turn around and fight that crowd too, and we're not going that way. And they told King Achish, anything wrong with that? This is not going to happen. Send him back. Now, we have David and his men marching 3 days, 110 miles roundabout, somewhere a little over 100 miles for sure. Most estimate around 110 miles. They've marched 3 days' journey. They don't have a Toyota, they don't have a Ford, don't have a Chevrolet. They're using Pat and Charlie, you know. They're marching in 3 days. They're mighty warriors. They're wanting to fight. They get there. They're told, we don't trust you. We don't want you. Go home. David has to go back to his men, tell them to turn around and go home. How miserable. Can't you hear them talking amongst themselves? What else do we have to do to prove ourselves? David let us do this. Already there's grumbling. You don't have to wonder. We know. All because of David's confusing decision. All because of David. It's confusing for David, who's been anointed to be king one day, to choose to fight against Israel. That would be confusing to anybody that's from Israel. Anybody want to argue with me about that? There's just no way. They were confused. And be honest with you, it was the beginning of his trouble, because the Philistines don't want him and Israel don't want him, and he finds himself in a mess. He's joined with his enemy. And I would say, as Peterson says in his commentary, I'm going to read it to you because I think it's interesting how he words it. The irony of the role of Achish does not escape us. This is Peterson. A king from Israel's arch enemy provides the context for preserving Israel's fugitive and coming king. In other words, if you didn't get what he said, I'll make it real plain for you. Of all things for God to use to preserve David, the king of the Philistines. The king of the Philistines God used to preserve David, to keep David from being killed so that he would one day be Israel's king. You cannot tell me there's not humor in the Bible. Achish is used. And that's what Peterson was saying in his commentary. But his decisions to fight against Israel had to be confusing. I was talking to, and I didn't say it in the first hour, and I should have, but because I was around a lot of preachers and taking part in Dr. Stocks' funeral this week, which is, again, a great man, been in this pulpit several times, and just I was honored to take part. Gene Williams is his pastor, and we shared together. Brother Dan spoke as well. We talked a lot about preachers in retirement, and do preachers ever retire? That kind of thing was discussed. And I heard one say something of, I don't retire because I want to preach every opportunity I get, but I like not having to make the decisions anymore. I like not being the one, but why? There's pressure in making decisions, isn't there? Always has been. Always will be. And all those people were saying was, hey, It's a lot easier when I'm just asked to go preach and I'm not the one making decisions or the one saying we're going to do this. Or no, I'm just going on Sunday and preaching, and I go somewhere else the next week and preach. Life's easier that way. David found out leading's not always fun, didn't he? But he had a crushing defeat. It wasn't the defeat that he had in an army. He didn't fight. His crushing defeat was that no one wanted him. I mean, it's a crushing defeat. The Bible says in verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 30, very plainly, and it came to pass when David and his men had come to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south in Ziklag and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire. So David's scenario goes from bad to worse. He's made the decision to go fight against Israel. While he's there, the Amalekites go, David's been treating us pretty rough. Let's treat David rough. Let's go ransack Ziklag where he's living. Let's destroy everything. Let's take his wives. Let's take his sons, his daughters. Matter of fact, let's take all that they have and bring it to us. And that's what they do. And even though he has not fought any at this point, he has sure lost a big war, hasn't he? He's not fought, but he's lost. And I look at that, and you can almost see now the men that they're frustrated because now their wives are being captive, and their children have been captured, and they're having to find somebody to blame. And guess who they blame? They blame David. He's the leader. Now I want to remind you, this is so important to get. These 600 men were Israelites as well. They made a decision to fight against their own people, just like David. Now, David was the leader, not trying to sidestep, but they also made a decision, didn't they? But have you ever picked up that when people make bad decisions, they want to deflect onto somebody else and blame somebody else for their bad decisions? You ever picked up? No one wants to take the blame. They want it to be someone else's blame. And again, I have to tell you I'm educated. You can't tell otherwise. But I've taken quite a few counseling classes when I was in seminary. And really deflection is a big deal, where people that find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, instead of accepting, I have done wrong, it's somebody else's fault. And they deflect, and they deflect. And that's what you see right here. Deflection, screaming right here. David did this to me. Well, no. David didn't do this all to you. You had some decision making in this as well. But the deflection's on because there's a crushing defeat, and David is going to be the one handed the results of this defeat. It's all David's fault. I find then that David finds himself consumed with discouragement. I mean consumed with it. Go to verses 4 and 5 in chapter 30. David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. That's a lot of crying. Then we even see the listing of Ahinoam and Abigail, the wives that had been captured. And not only was David's wives captured, but all their men's wives were captured. And I wrote this down. It's just a lesson for me to learn, a lesson for you to learn. Critics often arise in seasons of stress, confusion, or pain, don't they? Critics often rise up in the midst of stress and confusion and pain. Let me help you. I don't care if you watch Fox News or CNN News or, God help you, MSNBC. I don't know why anybody would do that. But anyway, another story in itself. To be honest with you. But have you noticed, if you didn't know this, I'm going to help y'all out. Did you know there's a government shutdown right now? It's not really a shutdown. It's a form of a shutdown. But the Democrats are blaming the Republicans, and the Republicans are blaming the Democrats. And by the way, if you think I'm getting political, you are. I am. You're right. I know who voted no. That would be who should be blamed for vote, but I digress. Bottom line is, in the midst of crisis, it's a blame game. And it's interesting, not only is it that way in politics, it's that way with you. And it's that way with me. When there's a problem, here comes the blame game. You ever picked up on that? Am I telling the truth? I wouldn't have done that if he hadn't. I wouldn't have said that if she didn't. Oh, it never ends. So the human nature, I say this all the time in homiletics. The Bible is immutable. It's immutable. It's unchanging. It's not going to ever change. I'll tell you something else doesn't change. Human nature. The devil might do different modes of temptation because we have things like internet and computers and that. But the truth is, human nature in its propensity away from God is still screaming the way today just like it did in ancient biblical days. Two things you can count on. The Bible's going to be true, and human nature is going to be human nature, no matter what century you're reading about. And boy, do we see it right here, don't we?